Many watch enthusiasts love the term tool watch. I admit I'm one of them, but it has been overused by now to the point that it seems that to gain such a moniker, all a watch needs is to have one hand to point at the minutes and one hand to point at the hours. A third hand to indicate the seconds is just the cherry on the top. For all intents and purposes, regulators seem to be the granddaddies of tool watches, especially when said tools were used by watchmakers themselves as far back as the 18th century. They have to be tool watches, right? Did I mention they not only have three hands, but each hand has its own dial? Definitely tool watches. Jokes aside, truth is the convenient way to display time we are so used to is new. Very new. You see, the earliest mechanical clocks used a single hand to indicate the hours, and it wasn't until the mid-18th century that minute hands became more prevalent on clocks, while the inclusion of a seconds hand came even later, primarily in the 19th century. Of course, nowadays the toolness of this type of watch has given way to its elegant aesthetic appeal, much like antique phonographs serve as nostalgic decor in fancy living rooms. Except this is not decor. This is primarily a great timekeeping device that just happens to look amazing. Its 41mm case houses a regulated ST1711 automatic movement that can be looked at through the exhibition case back. Because this watch shares the case with the SC3 that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago, I won't go into too much detail here. I recommend you watch that review to find out more details on the case, the leather strap and the buying process, while in this video I will focus more on the regulator's dial and automatic movement. The dial is obviously la pièce de résistance of the watch, the main reason why someone would buy it. And while the concept in itself is great, the execution is as good as any. Starting from the outside, the minutes track spacing is simply perfect. Painted on top of concentric circles like notes on a staff in a music sheet, the markers are exclamation points between the classy looking numerals. The same font is used in the second subdial, while the hours are counted using Roman numerals. The surface of the two subdials is covered in a checkered pattern of rhombuses delimited by concentric circles from the rest of the dial that is finished with a nicely guilloché pattern. Both the logo and the model's name are printed on elevated platforms that make them pop, and their sizes and fonts do a great job of seamlessly integrating them. Keen eyes will have surely noticed a striking resemblance to one of the most famous regulators, the one produced by Chrono Swiss. But on closer inspection, it soon becomes apparent that the only element Alex, the owner of Perpetual, has lifted straight out of the Swiss watch is the handset, and that's because, as he simply acknowledges, it's perfect. And I have to agree with him, as getting used to reading the watch takes very little and legibility is second to none, thanks in part to the double dome sapphire crystal whose anti-reflective coating lets out just enough reflection to showcase another hallmark of high-end horology that's rarely offered at the price point: the bluing of the hands by heat treatment. On my 19cm wrist, the watch wears perfectly, if only just a hair large. Unlike the SC3 I previously reviewed, this is a through and through dress watch, a classy representation of the passion for timepieces, as this is not a generic watch, but a statement piece. I don't really know how the regulator would sit on your wrist, but I guess the best way to determine if it would fit you would be to try on an Orient Bambino 3rd or 4th generation. But is there more to this watch than its striking appearance? Can a Chinese caliber be a USP and not just a way to minimize production costs? The answer is a yes, very quickly followed by a but it depends. After uploading my review of the SC3, Alex reached out in an attempt to provide more insight into what 20 years of experience of working with the Seagull calibers have taught him, and after further investigating, this is what I discovered. What percentage of a shipment of brand new SD calibers would you ballpark to be in perfect working conditions straight out of the box? 90%? 80%? It can't be worse than 70% surely. Well, according to my sources, of the 50 SD calibers that are shipped in one brand new container, only an average of 20 pieces can be used straight up. Yes, that's a 60% rejection rate. And remember, we're talking about the real thing, official Seagull produced calibers, not clones of unspecified origins. What about the rest? Another 30% can be salvaged by cannibalizing the rest of the non-viable movements in order to fix problems that are usually related to poorly assembled substandard components that lead to amplitude rates way below acceptable values. I was even told that on closer inspection, some of the brand new calibers delivered by Seagull turned out to be repurposed. That's why buying a watch powered by a Chinese caliber can lead to tossing it in the bin after less than a couple of years. The only way to make sure you don't buy a dud is to spend your money on watches produced by reputable, established companies. Speaking of purchasing watches, how much would you be willing to spend on a microbrand timepiece that started its run 20 years ago, long before 99% of today's microbrands were not even half-remembered dreams? How much would you pay for fit and finish mainstream manufacturers would charge an arm and a leg for? Check the link in the description and I'm pretty sure you will have a very nice surprise. Regardless of your purchase decision though, I hope you enjoyed this review enough to tune in for future videos. In a time when YouTube's homepage is saturated with various experts reacting at watches you'll never afford, the best way to discover lesser known gems like this one is to subscribe to the channels you like and enable notifications. Who knows, maybe I'll get to feature the watch you want.